Okay, so I'd like to introduce Amelie Gaudin with the Department of Plant Sciences here at UC Davis.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure today to introduce the team and our theme for today, which is potential of whole orchard recycling to build both sustainability and resilience of almond production. This project responds to the current challenge that many growers face when they want to replant their almond orchard. There's a large amount of orchards that are being turned over and replanted with almond. This has been because of the drought, but also high commodity prices incentivizing orchard turnover. So what to do with the retired trees? Well, there's increasing burning restrictions across the Central Valley, and power cogeneration plants are increasingly closing, leading to a clog of biomass and leaving growers with very few options. So we need new outlets for tree residues. Recycling an orchard by reincorporating biomass presents opportunities to use residue mulching to recycle nutrients, and that can also provide multiple co-benefit to soil health and tree productivity. Our team is highly interdisciplinary, and we decided to explore the multiple outcomes for sustainability and resilience of the almond industry. So how does whole orchard recycling works? Well, the old orchards are being chipped and spread back into the orchard before replanting. This can be done or with a wood chipper and spreader, or use that are going to provide small chips, or by using land clearing equipment, which are going to grind and incorporate the whole trees back into the soil. However, there was still some knowledge gap to make this practice feasible at a larger scale, and we try to address some of them with our work. First, we will present the impact of whole orchard recycling on soil health, and in particular, can this help improve soil physical properties? And how does that in turn influence water retention, conservation of water, and response to deficit irrigation? Then we will take a quick dive into the short and longer term benefits for almond growth and nutrition and nitrogen management. We'll touch on the implication of whole orchard recycling for almond disease management and nematodes, and close with the potential added cost to implement whole orchard recycling and the overall greenhouse gas footprint of this technology. This research was done at various research sites across the valley. We've examined short-term effects of whole orchard recycling in orchard 2 years after replanting, both in Manteca and Bakersfield, where the whole tree were chipped and reapplied, and the chips reapplied with a tub grinder. But also longer-term effects, 10+ years after recycling, and these platform was established at the Kearney Agricultural Research and Extension Center. At this site, the whole tree were ground and incorporated using the iron wolf and then reapplied. So first, we're going to talk about soil health and resilience of recycled orchard to water shortage. Emad?
Hi everyone. I'll start with a definition of soil health from USDA first. As you all know, soil health or soil quality is the continuing capacity of soil to function as vital living ecosystems that can sustain plant, animal, and humans. To have a healthy soil, we need to improve 3 important components: soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. These components can be improved by adding soil organic matter to soil, which ultimately can increase and improve our soil quality. Healthy soils can provide multiple ecosystem services and increase sustainability of our agricultural systems, including the almond orchard. I'm going to present soil health results from our long-term learning trial that Amelie already explained the treatments. We have two treatments, whole orchard recycling or the grind treatment and the push and burn. Starting with soil physical properties here, the top left figure is mean weight diameter, which is a weighted average index of wet aggregate stability. It shows that to what extent soil aggregates resist falling apart when hit by rainfall drops. We found that mean weight diameter increased by 19% in the grind treatment compared to the burn, which indicates a better soil aggregation in the recycled orchards. Top right figure shows infiltration rate that used a dual head infiltrometer by measuring soil saturated hydraulic conductivity. And we found that a significant improvement is in the recycled orchards 9 years after recycling, where we found higher infiltration rates compared to the soil in the burn treatment. Whole orchard recycling also resulted in 4% less bulk density and also 14% less soil compaction in the recycled orchards. To measure how much carbon is stored in the soil, 9 years after recycling, we sampled soil down to 1.4 meters, about 60 inches, using a geoprop that you can see its picture here. The grind treatment stored 8 more tons of carbon per hectare, about 3.5 tons per acre in the top 30 centimeters of the soil, or 12 inches. We also found larger numbers in the grind treatment as we went deeper in the soil, but the difference between these treatments were not significant. In the top 6 inches of the soil, when you see the positive changes title, we found higher total carbon and nitrogen contents in the grind treatment compared to the burn. But we didn't find significant changes in soil pH, electrical conductivity, cation exchange capacity, and some soil minerals such as calcium, magnesium, potassium, etc. We also found that soil microbial biomass carbon and soil microbial biomass nitrogen increased 47% and 13% respectively when we recycled the orchard back into the soil compared to our burn treatment. The cluster figures on the right shows the enzyme activity. We found that whole orchard recycling overall maintained enzyme activity. The left figures actually shows the activity of enzymes involved in carbon cycle. And we found 38% increase in them, CB and BG, and also increases in enzymes involved with cycling of nitrogen, NAG, in the recycled orchards compared to the burn treatment. We found that whole orchard recycling actually improved soil hydraulic properties compared to the burn treatment. The figure on the top shows soil water retention curves that used a high probe apparatus to measure. And we found 30% higher water content at the field capacity level in the grind treatment compared to the burn. The below figure shows soil water content in the grind and burn treatments under deficit and regular irrigation regimes. I will explain these treatments in the next slide, but we used a neutron probe and using the access tubes on the right that were installed between the trees and on the berms. And we found that the burn treatment significantly less water content at the topsoil as well as at the depth, the purple dotted line here compared to the other treatments. This shows that recycled orchard had a better hydraulic properties that could provide more water to the trees when water becomes scarce. About the deficit irrigation trial, we conducted a deficit irrigation treatment in summer of 2017 to test resiliency of almond trees to water shortage. Irrigation treatments consisted of a regular 100% ET and a deficit or 80% ET for 28 days based on the crop and reference evapotranspiration values. The top figure shows average stem water potential measured weekly using a pressure bomb. And we found that trees maintain less negative stem water potential compared to the burn tree. Less negative stem water potential shows that trees are experiencing less stress as they are consuming less energy to move the water through their xylons. The middle figure shows our weekly stem water potential measurements during, before, during, and after the deficit irrigation treatment. Growing trees always maintain less negative stem water potential compared to the burn, especially on the most stressed day around July 10th. Also, growing tree assisted trees in their post-stress recovery after we resumed the regular irrigation treatment. The bottom figure shows our stomatal conductivity measurements, which is actually the measure of passage rate of carbon dioxide entering or water vapor exiting through the stomatal of a leaf. We found that growing treatment had higher stomatal conductance compared to the burn. And this is especially important when we found significant differences between the treatment when we had the deficit irrigation treatment. Our next slide is our yields. In 2017, kernel yields. The figure on the left shows the yields, and we found that trees in the growing plots produce greater yield compared to the burn under both irrigation scenarios. We found up to 20% greater kernel yield in the growing treatment, and also we measured irrigation water use efficiency in our regular irrigation treatment. And we found that there was a 20% improvement in irrigation water use efficiency when trees were planted in the recycled plots. With that, I'm going to hand it over to the next presenter, Brent. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm Brent Holtz. I am a farm advisor with the University of California in San Joaquin County, and I'm going to continue the discussion on whole orchard recycling on second generation almond tree growth, yield, and fertility. I'm going to talk about yield a little bit, and I would like to point out in this first trial done at Kearney, where we talked about the grind and the burn treatments. These are two treatments that actually both happen in nature when wood or forests are reach the end of their lifetime. They can either grind up or be decomposed, or they can be burned in a field. Now in the trials that we have after this, we're hauling the wood chips to a cogeneration plant. So none of the original residue is being left in the field. But in this original trial, we followed the yields for up to 8 years. I don't have the last year on here yet. And in the main point I want to make in the grind treatment is that we typically had a significant yield increase compared to the burn treatment. Not every year was significant, but every year we had a slightly higher yield in the grind treatment than the burn treatment. In 2013, it was actually significant at the 0.05 level. Then in 2017, it was almost significant at the 0.07 level. But I think the main point is that the cumulative yield for the 8 years, we have 1,500 kernel pounds more per acre in the grind treatment than the burn. And at $3 a pound, we have a 4,000 pound difference that we can actually attribute to the whole orchard recycling versus burning. Getting a little ahead of myself, I wanted to also talk about the trunk diameter circumference, the tree growth that we've seen in the grind and burn treatments. And the first year of the study, the burn was actually a little bit higher. In fact, in the second year of the study, the burn treatment trees were actually a little higher, almost significantly higher. By the third year, 2011, we saw it evening off, but by 2012, we saw a slight increase in the trunk circumference in the grind treatments versus the burn. And then in 2013 through 16, we started to see significant increases in the grind treatment over the burn treatment. So we started being able to show that the grind treatment was actually helping not only in yields, but in tree growth, trunk circumference. And trunk circumference is one of our best ways to measure tree growth. Emad already touched on nutrients a little bit, but interestingly, the first year that we actually started looking at soil analysis in 2010, these were nutrients that actually showed differences, and in 2010, most of the nutrients, if you see the paired nutrients are in blue, that means that the burn treatment had significantly higher levels than the grind treatment. And we attribute this to the ashes probably generated after the burn treatment were spread in the soil, and whatever nutrients were probably left in those ashes were probably more available. While in this particular method with the iron wolf, rather large chunks of wood are left in the ground that probably took a long time to start decomposing. By the second year, we see that some of these nutrients are no longer significantly different like they were, and by the third year of the study, 2012, we can start to see that some of the grind paired nutrients that we've already talked about, like organic matter and carbon organic matter, they're all starting to become significantly greater in the third year of the study. So we think it takes about 3 years for the benefit of the wood chips to start decomposing enough so that their benefit can be realized in soil analysis. Next slide. I just want to mention we also did leaf analysis through the years, and in some cases the leaf analysis of the trees mirrored the findings we were finding in the soil analysis. But an important thing I want to highlight here is the sodium levels. Oh, I see my last column in the burn didn't show up in my view, but I think, oh, there they are. The main point was that the sodium levels were significantly less in the grind treatment trees than in the burn. And this trial was done at the Kearney Ag Center. They had a bad well in 2013. You can see that the grind treatment trees had 600 parts per million nitrate, but the burn treatment trees had almost 900. And Kearney had to close down a well that year because it had very high sodium levels. But I think the point of it is that through all the years of the study, the sodium levels were significantly less in the grind treatment than the burn. And I think that's one important area. I've had growers tell me that this was one of the deciding factors that allowed them to recycle orchards, is because of the salt is becoming a limiting parameter, especially in Fresno South in the San Joaquin Valley. So we don't exactly know why the organic matter probably is lowering sodium in the leaf tissue. It may be that it's actually binding sodium in the ground, or it may be that the added organic matter, as Emad has showed, is increasing the infiltration rates, and the sodium could be moving through the ground. But either way, we've traditionally seen a reduction in sodium levels in where we've added the wood chips back to the ground and look at further. Another item in the first study at Kearney also had high nitrogen levels in the water, and we didn't see stunting the first year when we looked at whole orchard recycling as far as nitrogen requirements after adding all that wood to the soil. But in our other trials, we have seen reduced growth after whole orchard recycling, and we think that a lot of that is due to available nitrogen. We've added a lot of carbon and nitrogen to the ground, and we've decided to increase our nitrogen rates that we're applying. And this is just 2 trees, a control and a tree that I added 0.8 ounces of actual N to in March, and just a picture of it in April, and we saw striking differences. So we think that this was one of our clues that we needed to increase our nitrogen recommendation after following whole orchard recycling. Next. And we did a trial where we added different levels of nitrogen, and I added triple 15 in addition to what the grower was applying through the drip system, because a drip system, a double-line drip system, the first year is a very inefficient way to be applying nitrogen. Only about 20% of the actual nitrogen could be getting to the trees that first year. So in this trial, we circled the trees with hand-applied triple 15 fertilizer, NPK, at control rates and at 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and 1 ounce of actual material per tree per month in the study. And the graph below shows that when we got up to over 60 pounds per acre of nitrogen, we didn't see much additional benefit by applying more nitrogen than that. And keeping in mind that on our normally on a first year almond tree after replanting, we would only add about 35 pounds of nitrogen per acre, which would be about 3 to 4 actual ounces of tree per year. Keeping in mind that we never add more than 1 ounce per tree at any one time, because when we go over that, we can cause nitrogen burning. So basically, the first year of the study, we believe now that we need to double our nitrogen recommendation to about 60 to 70 pounds per acre, or 6 to 8 actual ounces of nitrogen per tree. And in the second year of the study, we didn't see a need to increase our fertilizer rate above what we were applying. So we think that whole orchard recycling is only going to be need additional nitrogen the first year of the study. We hope that in the years afterwards, we'll be able to document a nitrogen efficiency with whole orchard recycling. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. We're now going to touch a little bit on the impact of whole orchard recycling on almond diseases.
Okay, this is Greg Browne, and next will be Andreas Westphal. I'm going to talk about the soil-borne disease aspects of whole orchard recycling as far as we know them. We're going to consider 2 arbitrary categories of soil-borne diseases here. On the left, you see some images of Prunus replant disease. It's one of what we call replant problems, which can stunt and rob yields from replanted orchards, typically without killing trees, and they're best controlled by pre-plant soil treatments like soil fumigation. And then on the right, the other category, other soil-borne diseases, which fumigation is not known to be effective for, but can be just as important in affecting orchard yields and even orchard survival. A little detail first on soil microbial communities and the replant problem we call Prunus replant disease and whole orchard recycling. We know that microbial communities perform essential functions in soil, such as transformation of nutrients into forms that plants can use, but the soil communities can also mediate negative effects of Prunus when it's replanted after Prunus crops. We consider Prunus replant disease, you can follow along here, to be induced by crop-specific soil-borne microbial complex that suppresses tree growth and yields. This PRD complex can be prevented with soil fumigation, especially with fumigants that include chloropicrin. So related management questions about whole orchard recycling are, what are the possible impacts on this PRD complex? And does whole orchard recycling help or hinder management of PRD with or without pre-plant soil fumigation? So to answer these questions, in some of our orchard trials, we set up treatments that included the possible factorial combinations of whole orchard recycling and fumigation. Whole orchard recycling occurred with and without soil fumigation, and pre-plant soil fumigation occurred with and without whole orchard recycling. And then we evaluated the treatment effects based on increases in trunk cross-sectional area after planting, and as I'll touch on, soil microbial community shifts associated with the treatments. And not shown today will be some physiochemical, soil, and nutritional data. What did we find? The graphs on the top here are the growth of the trees in response to those treatments I just showed you in the first year after planting. And then the graphs on the bottom are the increases in trunk cross-sectional area in year 2 or after year 2 after planting. For both years, on the left, we can see that whole orchard recycling suppressed tree growth with or without soil fumigation. We're looking at the main effect of whole orchard recycling here. And then on the right, for both years, we can see that pre-plant fumigation increased tree growth with or without whole orchard recycling. Again, the main effect we're looking at here. So it looks like whole orchard recycling chips have potential to suppress tree growth, but this suppression does not seem to be due to PRD, the phenomenon that we prevent with pre-plant soil fumigation. And you can recall the data that Brent showed indicating that we can manage this whole orchard recycling induced growth suppression by extra nitrogen fertilization. Okay, next, just a glimpse of impacts of those treatments I just showed you on the soil microbial communities. In these graphs, bacteria on the left and fungi on the right, each symbol represents a microbial community in a soil sample, color-coded by treatment. The symbols are ordinated according to how similar their communities are. The closer together, the more similar. The farther apart, the less similar. And for today, just pay attention to the colors of these symbols, not their shapes. So first, for bacteria on the left, you can note that fumigated samples ordinate separately from non-fumigated samples. The blue and the green are the controls. Orange and red are fumigated. You can also notice that the chipped treatments indicated by CH here, orange for fumigated with chips, and red without chips, they overlap with each other. So they're kind of mixed in together, indicating community similarity, at least among the fumigated treatments. And then similarly for the blue and the green symbols, that's without fumigation. You notice that the blue and the green representing no chips and chips are kind of intermixed as well. So with bacteria, not much impact of chips, large impact of fumigation. And then on the right, let's take a look at the fungi. We still see that the symbols are segregating by whether or not they were in pre-plant fumigated or non-fumigated plots. But in this case, you will notice that they seem to also be impacted by whether or not they had whole orchard recycling chips added to them. The communities are significantly impacted by those chips. Okay, and a lot of fungi are known for their ability to degrade wood. So, some summary comments here. First, facts. We do think that there is potential for whole orchard recycling to temporarily suppress orchard growth, but this appears related more to nitrogen availability and not to Prunus replant disease. There seem to be no significant implications of whole orchard recycling for either pre-plant or PRD or pre-plant soil fumigation. Most of our trials are not old enough really to conclude about long-term impacts of whole orchard recycling on disease interactions, but we are going to offer you some considerations to think about. Firstly, we think it's unlikely that whole orchard recycling will aggravate phytophthora diseases because whole orchard recycling improves water penetration and also enhances cellulose degradation. Cellulose is a component of Phytophthora cell walls. Next, it's not advisable to recycle orchards infested with armillaria, we think, due to potential of the pathogen survival in wood chips and spread in those wood chips. It also may be risky to conduct whole orchard recycling where there are severe problems with butt rot or crown gall disease. It is best to chip whole orchard recycling wood to a size down to more like to 2 inches or instead of larger, and also to let it dry in the soil surface before you incorporate it, and this will reduce survival of wood rot fungi. And then finally, it's a good idea to consult with your local farm advisor about special cases of severe disease or just for updates on the process. And next, we're going to hear from Andreas Westphal on effects on nematode populations.
Well, good afternoon. This is Andreas Westphal with University of California, Riverside. I'm extension nematologist, and I wanted to give you a brief overview of what happens to nematodes. First off, nematodes are microscopic roundworms, and we distinguish between those that are beneficial, free-living nematodes. Those are bacterial-feeding nematodes or fungal-feeding nematodes. They are very important in the breakdown of organic matter. And plant-parasitic nematodes, in contrast to those, which are obligate parasites that feed on plant roots, and that way reduce our yields that we obtain. Now at the graphic on the upper left-hand corner, you see the numbers of free-living nematodes in there. And you see that in most instances, actually in 5 of the 7 sites, we, after chip amendment, see a higher number of free-living nematodes, which could very well mean that wood chips that are added to the soil also trigger some microbial boost that then allows these nematodes to sustain themselves on. That could be a very beneficial process. In the right lower-hand corner, you see when depicted the numbers of one of the nematode, plant-parasitic nematodes important in orchards. In most instances, numbers are fairly similar, are chips added or not. Those numbers overall were surprisingly low in all of these 7 sites, so it's kind of hard in the field conditions to fully examine the effect of chips too. That's why there are ongoing studies that further examine what microbial populations may do on plant-parasitic nematodes. Thank you so much, and to the next.
Next, we're going to talk about the cost for implemented whole orchard recycling.
Hi, this is Brent Holtz back again, and I just wanted to follow Greg and Andreas by saying if replant situation, if we implement whole orchard recycling, we usually tell growers to go ahead and if you believe you needed to fumigate for nematodes or fumigate for replant disease, we normally recommend you would do that anyway. We would spread the wood chips out on top and then proceed with our normal replant strategies that could include fumigation. As was concluded earlier in Amelie's introduction, some of the cogeneration plants started closing down in 2015 because PG&E and other large utility companies wanted or were being mandated to buy more clean energy like solar and wind power. And burning wood chips is kind of like burning coal, and we considered a very clean energy source. So as the cogen plants closed down, all of a sudden the wood chips lost their value, and growers who had been able to get their orchards removed for practically for free by the orchard removal companies were now paying $600 or $700 an acre to have their orchards removed. So quite a big increase in why would growers even want to do this. And the initial study we did was with the Iron Wolf. We brought that back. It was a large rock crusher that could act like a rototiller. And we brought that back again in 2015 in a trial in Chowchilla, and unfortunately it cost about $1,500 an acre and could only do about 2 acres a day. Whereas the horizontal grinder that's pictured here could do about 15 to 20 acres a day, even faster than the old tub grinders. But the orchard removal process that the companies were typically using that were grinding up their wood chips and sending them to the cogeneration plants, they involved about 5 machines: an excavator to uproot the trees, a loader to bring the trees to the horizontal grinder, then they had to be ground up, and then the big piles of wood chips had to be loaded into spreaders that were modified to spread wood chips, as you can see here in the bottom right corner. And when you are doing orchard recycling, the horizontal grinders could have a 4-inch screen or they could have a 2-inch screen, and we generally recommend that the grinders use the 2-inch screen to make the wood chips 2 inches or less to begin with. Next slide, Amelie. And so here's a picture of 2 Kuhn and Knight manure spreaders that have been modified to spread wood chips. And you can see the wood chips can be spread very nicely and uniformly over the whole orchard floor, where it was the iron wolf, they were only ground into the ground where the actual tree stood before. So it created a very uneven distribution of wood, where here the wood chips can be distributed very evenly over the orchard floor, and they're only usually about 1 to 2 inches deep. But if the grower decides to keep these wood chips and spread them back on the ground, then they have to pay an additional $300 or $400. But the point is, if you're grinding up an orchard, you're going to spend $600 to $700 anyway, and only $300 to $400 more to spread it back. Now, this is the Manteca site where we actually spread back 64 tons of wood chips per acre. And if you analyze the wood chips, they're 0.3% nitrogen or 0.2% potassium, 0.6% calcium, and 50% carbon. So if you were putting 64 tons of wood chips back in the ground, you're actually putting 396 pounds of nitrogen back on the ground, 256 pounds of potassium, 768 pounds of calcium, and 64,000 pounds of carbon. Now, all these nutrients aren't going to be readily available, as we've already talked about, and we are probably disrupting our carbon to nitrogen cycle that first year, as we've talked about, by having to add nitrogen. But we will ultimately at some day get these nutrients back, and hopefully they'll be available to the orchard, the new orchard that's growing. And hopefully all this carbon will help bind the fertilizer that growers are actually putting on, and perhaps reducing leaching through the orchard floor. And so anyway, growers have gone from getting their orchards removed for free to having to spend $600 or $700 per acre to grind their orchards, another $300 or $400 per acre to spread the wood chips back out, up to $1,000 per acre expense. But as a response to this, the San Joaquin Air Pollution Control District is now offering growers up to $300 or $600 per acre, up to about $60,000 per year per grower to implement whole orchard recycling. So anyway, we're starting to have some programs that are helping offset the cost of whole orchard recycling, and this has created quite an interest. And we hope ultimately through the work of this team and the next speaker, Elias, that someday we'll be able to get some carbon credits for this process and return even more incentive for growers to recycle their orchards. So thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Elias is going to continue this conversation looking at greenhouse gas footprint of whole orchard recycling.
Hello. Okay. So I use a life cycle assessment model to assess the greenhouse gas impacts of this practice and other orchard practices. LCA, life cycle assessment, is a set of tools and methods that are used to quantify the impacts and potential benefits of industrial processes, including cropping systems, from raw material extraction all the way through product production and use, and ultimately recycling in terms of an industrial product. California orchards typically require high fuel and agrochemical inputs, but they also provide environmental benefits by storing carbon from the atmosphere and by producing very large quantities of food and biomass co-product on a per acre basis. So we've developed an LCA model to quantify these impacts and benefits under various potential management scenarios, including whole orchard recycling. I'll mainly discuss the greenhouse gas footprint, but we're also interested in a range of other impact categories. So including, but not limited to, water use, ecotoxicity, human health, and many others. So just keep those in mind. We are also quantifying factors beyond greenhouse gas impacts. So on a year-to-year basis, CO2 uptake and storage can be very significant in the orchard system, almost or potentially more than the quantity of total greenhouse gas emissions, one of the findings from our earlier research. So the ultimate fate of the biomass co-products, the reservoir of carbon taken up from the atmosphere, is really important to the net greenhouse gas impacts of the orchard. These fates include open burn, which we've heard about, bioenergy production, also a traditional form of orchard biomass disposal, surface mulching, similar to whole orchard recycling without the tillage, or whole orchard recycling. And there may be others, including cellulosic biomass or cellulosic ethanol production, and biomass gasification. We aren't considering those yet, as the technology is sort of in development in the Central Valley. So you can see on the right this map, the 3 major growing regions. The orchard landscape in the Central Valley is dynamic and regionally variable to a pretty large extent, especially when we're considering the spatial and functional relationships between orchard blocks and infrastructure, environmental, and legal systems. We see that in the distance traveled to bioenergy plants, the restrictions on burning, variable between air districts, etc. So to assess the effects of whole orchard recycling or other orchard removal practices on this landscape industry-wide scale, we have to generate a business as usual or baseline scenario, taking these relationships into account. And you can see the baseline scenario to which we compare whole orchard recycling varies depending on the region. So in modeling these different management strategies for end-of-life biomass removal, we're addressing a number of impact and benefit trade-offs in the model.
Hello.
There's no silver bullet option necessarily. Each biomass fate has its own set of benefits and particular impacts. So these parameters on the right, the determining factors for
we have the source tags for both places.
Orchard for the orchard greenhouse gas impact.
We have tanks for both places.
And other, it's very distracting. These parameters, orchard determining factors in the model for impact factors are affected differently by each of these biomass fates. So if we're looking at something, we're looking at whole orchard recycling, for example, we can look at the parameter carbon storage and see that compared to the baseline, the business as usual scenario, whole orchard recycling has very high carbon storage, but it also has high diesel combustion with additional grinding and tillage operations, and it has reduced fossil energy displacement. Fossil energy displacement is a feature of the bioenergy production, one of the greenhouse gas benefits of the biomass power plant system. So we have to evaluate the change in these different parameters and as well the relative importance of each parameter to the total greenhouse gas impacts of the system. And the question is, do the benefits of something like whole orchard recycling in terms of any particular impact, greenhouse gases, pollutants, etc., outweigh the detrimental factors? So talking about greenhouse gas emissions in particular, we're looking at various compartments within the orchard system where carbon can be stored. So carbon storage begins with tree planting. Biomass accumulation is taking carbon out of the atmosphere in the form of CO2 and storing it in both standing biomass and root biomass in the soils. The relative benefit from a climate standpoint, from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint, of any sequestered or temporarily stored unit of carbon dioxide, a kilogram of carbon from the atmosphere, is proportional to the length of time that it is stored within any of these compartments. So when we look at whole orchard recycling, we have the compartment of standing biomass where carbon is stored over the lifetime of the orchard. And that time can be extended through end of life into the next orchard life cycle by taking those chips and putting them into the soil rather than burning them for energy or just open in the field and releasing not only the carbon that is stored, but also producing pollutants and more powerful greenhouse gases such as nitrous oxide and methane. So taking all that into account, the model shows that whole orchard recycling is actually comparable in terms of greenhouse gas benefits to the bioenergy system, which displaces fossil fuels. You can see the blue as whole orchard recycling and green for bioenergy, pretty much the same in the Sacramento Valley and San Joaquin Valley, and it actually outperforms, according to this model, bioenergy production and fossil fuel displacement in the Tulare Lake region. And that's due to differences in travel, biomass transport to the plants, as well as different plant-specific characteristics obtained from the Air Resources Board pollution mapping tool. We also looked at the potential for the carbon stored in post-harvest co-products such as shells and hulls. If that's stored, we get an even greater benefit. And similarly, we've compared that to using those materials for energy production as well. The really interesting thing so far in these results is that the effects of whole orchard recycling, seen here on the right, it's easier to see in the Tulare Lake. That blue line, this is a cumulative greenhouse gas impact over the lifespan. And you can see that it's the same as the baseline scenario at the beginning. The whole orchard recycling is just about the same as the baseline scenario was when it reaches the end of this particular life cycle. So that means that whole orchard recycling, under the right circumstances, has the potential to counteract the greenhouse gas emissions from the whole production system of that orchard on that particular time frame. In effect, we can achieve greenhouse gas neutral status according to this model. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the presenters. Just gonna wrap it up real quick here and say what we find so far in summary is there's a lot of benefits of whole orchard recycling, improvements in soil physical properties, higher yields as the trees mature. There's no documented increase in disease pressures, especially if starting with a healthy orchard. There is a decrease in greenhouse gas footprints compared to other orchard disposal options. And something we found that growers ask about a lot is, will the chips get in the way of later orchard operations? And it seems that from the experience of growers that have been doing this, that is not really an issue, especially if they're incorporated deeply and ground to a small enough size. So there is some ongoing research that's not completed yet, especially on nitrogen nutrition and nitrogen cycling. under whole orchard recycling. Our colleague May Cullenber is working on that. And we can do some more work probably on looking at the long-term cost-benefit analysis. We know there's additional costs to implement it, but then the long-term benefits of these potential savings in water, the nutrient benefits over time, and so on can also represent benefits. So we have a new website that's up. It's about 75 to 80% completed now, so there's still some more information that's going to be added to that over the next week or two. But check that out. A lot of the results that we presented here are presented there as well on the website. Let's see. Okay, thank you very much.